SAML version 2 was released in the year 2005, which may seem like alien years to some viewers, especially considering the first iPhone was released in 2007. So yes, SAML came before the iPhone and is therefore an OG original gangster protocol. And for those viewers who don't know, SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language, which is not as alien as it sounds as we go through this video. So let's rewind the years back to the 90s when computers were desktops and the web browser was known as the Lynx browser. Yes, that's Lynx as in the deodorant spray. And this browser was text-based, unlike today's modern browsers. A form of email also existed in the 90s through SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And here's an amazing fun fact. Did you know that SMTP existed basically as an unauthenticated protocol for almost 3 decades? That meant if you wanted to send an email using SMTP servers, all you had to do was use another protocol known as Telnet, which was unencrypted and also unauthenticated, and then send an email through the SMTP server. Crazy, right? Especially when we're considering this video how SSO single sign-on has evolved and the username, passwords, MFA and all the jazz that goes with it. Again, a bit like in the 90s when people used to leave their front doors open. So it's no surprise that the internet was just as insecure back then. Now to solve this problem, and even before SAML was invented, there was various attempts. The first attempt was the basic authentication protocol, which was just that, sending the username and password in plain text over the wire in a header. Yes, they thought by asking a user to authenticate, that is, by providing a username and password before sending any emails or browsing the web, that this would stop eavesdroppers from watching the traffic. But in hindsight, can you see the problem with this being sent in plain text? Yep, you guessed it, the lack of encryption. So back then they added HTTPS, which would have been SSL back in those days in the 90s, because TLS was a later version of SSL. But technical keynote, HTTPS traffic can still be sniffed as a man-in-the-middle attack, and plenty of governments, including the alien governments and organizations, can thus sniff HTTPS traffic. So Microsoft came up with a few novel ideas, such as the NTLM Manager version 1, NTLM version 1, which was easily defeatable and was followed by NTLM version 2, which was better and still in wide usage today, but has plenty of shortcomings. Then came Kerberos, which relied on a central authority, the KDC, but had plenty of issues such as lots of network chit-chat that needed to be scaled on the internet, which just didn't work, so ultimately all of these legacy protocols failed. Now, just like dinosaurs once roamed the earth, all these legacy ether protocols which tried to protect the internet, but ultimately the internet spoiled their party. The internet being like a meteorite that killed the dinosaurs in this analogy. But not all dinosaurs. I mean, after all, Kerberos still has a place on the internet, and some of these other protocols, such as NTLM version 2, still survived the test of time. Just like we still have crocodiles and gators around us, that still remain from the dinosaurs' time. Kerberos is just like those crocodiles. And FYI, if you want more information about Kerberos and all the other protocols we mentioned so far, the full SSO history is explained in a very detailed technical video, which is linked here as a separate video, because this video is just for alien laughs. As we fast forward to the year 2000s, when the aliens made the joke about the Y2K and the world ending in the millennium. That was probably one of the greatest jokes that the aliens played on the humans. Perhaps a conspiracy theory to misredirect humans from their effort to make secure authentication in the year 2000. Fortunately, humans saw past this alien joke, and in the early 2000s, various web service standards were in early development, of which one particular standard being the Web Services Federation language WS-Fed stood out. Because it was the WS-Fed standard that brought SAML to the world. Or should I say, to the internet. As the internet back then was almost a whole new world in itself. And in the early 2000s, accessing the internet was either through a website, e.g. a web browser on your desktop, or via protocols such as FTP, Telnet, etc. And so it became evident that websites could offer value if there was a secure way for users to log into them. And this is where the WS-Fed standard changed the game. And here's a useful technical keynote. WS-Fed or Federation came before SAML. You see, SAML is a protocol that was used alongside WS-Fed in later years. But ultimately, WS-Fed was the original post and redirect standard. And this was a pretty big deal because the standard separated responsibility. And to understand this, let's probe a little deeper. Just look at that probing. Oh yeah. Now, some important separated responsibility roles that the WS-Fed brought into play was the IDP, the Identity Provider. And simply put, the Identity Provider is the entity that performs the authentication. And the IDP relays to another party or entity known as the service provider. And the service provider is essentially the application or website you're trying to access. And technical keynote, sometimes the service provider is known as the relying party. Now, the way the whole SAML workflow process works is like this. Let's say we have a website that the user needs to log into, and this website is obviously hosted by a service provider, aka relying party. Now, back in the day, it would have been a website. Today, it's probably an app, but nonetheless, this is step one. The user tries to access the website but is required to log in and goes to the service provider, who asks them to authenticate themselves. And to do this, the user goes to the IDP through the redirect from the service provider and is asked to enter credentials such as a username or password or even more to prove themselves to the IDP. Now, a few technical keynotes for your CISSP and CCSP exams. The service provider trusts the IDP, and this is done through certificates. I covered certificates in a separate video as well as PKI, which I have linked here. The second technical keynote is that the user could have an option of multiple IDPs that they want to authenticate to. And in turn, if authentication is successful, the IDP will contact the service provider behind the scenes and say that the user is all good and that the service provider can continue giving whatever access to website or resource that the user has requested. Now, just to get a little bit more technical on step 3, the IDP actually sends back a SAML packet to the service provider, and this SAML packet is pretty important. You see, the SAML packet contains attributes or claims, which is information about the user that the IDP has identified, such as the type being human, the age being 30, the head being bald, and the body being slim in this scenario. And this is all valuable information returned back to the service provider. Now, an even important technical keynote for your CISSP and CCSP exams. Do not get the terms confused between attributes and what is known as assertions. Attributes, as we just explained, are more about the data payload, whereas assertions are the fancy name for the overall SAML packet. That is then returned from the IDP back to the service provider saying that the user is all good. And this SAML assertion, aka packet, is used to exchange identity information and uses XML, extensible markup language. And some things to note about XML is it's old school and very heavyweight, but it forms the same kind of format as the attributes, as you can see, using the form of tags. And the format and structure of tags are enforced through rules known as schemas and DDTs. But ultimately, XML is good for one thing, in that if you've never seen the data before, it's very easy to understand XML because it's almost written in plain text English using the use of tags. And here's a bonus CISSP CCSP exam tip. This is a typical type of flashcard or question you'll see in your exam around SAML. I'll let you read this yourself, but ultimately the answer is SAML, or to be more specific at the time of the video, SAML version 2. Now, just before we finish this section on SAML, here's some important technical keynotes. SAML has served us well for many years. It's old school and robust. And even today, it's still used in many enterprises. However, with the evolving internet, SAML has obviously gone through some changes and adapted. You see, SAML now is designed for the web. And not just the web, but also mobile phones. But remember, SAML was shoehorned into such scenarios like mobile phones, so whilst it works, it may not necessarily be the best solution for modern mobile phone applications. And on the topic of mobile phones, let's move forward to around the year 2005 onwards, up to 2007 when the first iPhone was released, as mentioned earlier in the video. And of course, many wired networks were replaced with wireless networks. Now, I'm not going to deep dive into wireless technology, however, you can refer to my previous technical video, which is linked here, which was the Wi-Fi Wars, which was a gangster analogy video to explain WPA1, WPA2 and WPA3, because we are a gangster channel. Now, on the topic of gangster wars, the mobile phones introduced another war, which was the mobile phone wars. This primarily started with Steve Jobs and the revolutionary iPhone, to which Google later came up with another capable platform known as the Android. Or to continue the alien conspiracy on SSO, is that an Android robot or is that an alien? Nonetheless, it wouldn't be long before Windows got into the phone game with the Windows Phone. And it wouldn't be long before the internet became very complex. You see, when mobile apps became a thing, it was fine when it was just one with SAML, but when there became many apps, this became a slight problem for SAML, which was no longer fit for purpose in the new internet world. As again, remember, as mentioned earlier in the video, SAML is a heavyweight process in terms of XML, and not just that, in terms of security encryption. That is, all the HTTPS padlocks that need to be enforced on the app for all the internet chit-chat that goes back and forth from one app to the other, all on the same phone. And while SAML could do this, this really pushed its boundaries because it was really designed for enterprises, not this amount of apps and internet usage, which was not foreseen at the time of SAML's creation. And so at this point in history, it became clear a new protocol of authentication and authorization was needed, not just SAML, because otherwise it would get very, very complicated. So in this next part of the video, we will talk about the solution, which was OAuth. And to be more specific, OAuth version 1, which later became OAuth version 2. And OAuth essentially served as the foundation, because later on came OpenID-Connect, the layer that sits above OAuth, and these two combined became OpenID-Connect, or OIDC. Now, to fully understand OIDC, we need to go back in history to the time when OAuth first came out. Because before OAuth, websites and apps required users to share their username and passwords in order to access other services. Now, as the internet and apps grew, this obviously became a significant security concern. I mean, imagine letting website 1 share your actual username and password with website 2. And what's more, imagine this times across 1,000 websites. Who would be able to manage all those username and passwords and ensure they all remain secure in a centralized place? Well, this is where the OAuth Open Authorization Protocol became a game changer. And this was through the concept known as access delegation, and this is not the same as authentication. Now let's expand further on that point. You see, OAuth is primarily for authorization, meaning authorizing access to data, and this is not the same as authentication, e.g. confirming who a user is by logging in using a username and password, for example. Now, access delegation is what makes OAuth so cool, because it got rid of the need to share credentials. That means whilst the user will authenticate at website A, they do not need to authenticate again, because once authenticated, then the process of authorization through access delegation can occur. And essentially, this is the foundation of single sign-on, SSO. Now, at this point, just to pause, there are a few new terms in this whole OAuth process flow, unlike SAML, so let's go through these. There is the user, aka the owner of the data to be shared, and then there is the client, which can be the website or the app. Now, the key technical takeaway here is that the client, aka the website or the app, is asking the resource owner, aka the user, to allow or grant it access to the data. However, this is where the beauty of OAuth comes into play, because through OAuth, the user does not have to share their actual login credentials with the website or app, and in turn can allow authorization without sharing any form of login credentials for that matter. And the way that this is achieved is through what is known as an authorization server. Now, the authorization server is a bit like a service provider for everything related to identity access, and specifically single sign-on SSO. Common examples of this today is using Google or GitHub or any of the social media sites in order to log into a website or app without having to sign up or register on that website or app. And again, the beauty of all this is that the user does not have to share any credentials with the website or app, and by logging into the third party, e.g. the authorization server, only the authorization server asks for the login and then authenticates and later authorizes the user for that particular web or web app service that they want to access. Now, in reality, the way this works is that the website or the web app would ask the user how they want to authenticate and in turn authorize their access. And the user may select the OAuth, e.g. using a third-party provider such as Google or a social media login, and that is the authorization server provided by that third-party service. Now, the user would authenticate to that service provider's authorization server. Now, whilst the user may share login credentials with the authorization server of the service provider, this is never shared with the actual website or app. Instead, no username or password is ever shared past the point of the OAuth protocol, in that there's only tokenization that occurs. The token is generated upon successful login through OAuth by the user, and the token represents a successful login and is communicated back to the website or web app to say that the user is all good. Technical keynote: OAuth, specifically OAuth version 2, uses JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, for its tokenization. And to be more specific, JSON Web Tokens, JWT. Now, JSON Web Tokens is a video in its own right, so we won't go into all the technical details, but just remember that the tokenization, specifically the JWT, is a way to prevent the user from having to share their login credentials, and using this tokenization allows the web app to know that the user is all good without knowing their login credentials. And for the purposes of this video, just remember that JSON is generally faster and more efficient than SAML. And to finally finish the OAuth process flow, there is one other component known as the resource server. And this is ultimately where the website or web app content is stored that the user wanted to access before having to authenticate and authorize through this entire OAuth process. Now, just very briefly to explain OpenID and OpenID-Connect and how this came into play in the whole OAuth dance. Well, you could say that websites and web apps got greedy and wanted to know more than just the access delegation and authorization that was provided through tokenization from OAuth. And so OpenID, which is an authentication protocol, was added to sit on top of OAuth to provide more identity information about the user, because it turns out knowing information about the user that you are providing resources to is actually very, very valuable and also profitable. And so OAuth expanded from a simple access delegation protocol into a more authentication and access delegation protocol, meaning both authentication and authorization was done through a combination of OpenID and OAuth, which became OpenID-Connect, OIDC. And OIDC still used the JSON JWT tokens, but for different purposes, basically expanding it out into ID tokens and API tokens, both for access and authentication purposes. And these two standards combined basically meant that OpenID-Connect could compete with SAML in terms of doing both authentication and authorization, rather than just authorization alone in OAuth. That was the original intention. Now, to summarize everything we have learned, there are essentially two protocols that existed, being SAML and OpenID-Connect. SAML is the original older protocol and is commonly used for enterprise SSO and legacy web applications, whereas OpenID-Connect OIDC is the more modern, lightweight JSON-based protocol, ideal for mobile apps and native cloud applications that we use today. And the key takeaway is that these are complementary, not competing standards and protocols. I hope you found this video enjoyable and informative. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe to help support this new channel's growth, as I would love to create more videos like this if you're enjoying the content. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed the content as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you would like to see more content like this, it would be super fantastic if you could leave a like and subscribe to help support this channel's growth.